You already have a compounding identity. You did not choose it. You did not design it, but it is running right now. It has been running for years, and it is producing a return, just not the one you want. Here is what almost nobody tells you. The same mathematical force that turns a modest investment into a fortune over 20 years is doing something to you every single day. Not to your money, to your sense of what you are capable of, to the ceiling you do not even see because it has been there so long it looks like sky. Most people hear the word compounding and they think of a brokerage account. They think of charts that curve upward. They think it is something that happens to money when you are patient enough to leave it alone. That understanding is correct as far as it goes. The problem is that it stops there. Nobody draws the next line. Because compounding does not care what it is applied to. Your beliefs about yourself are accumulating interest right now. The small daily proof you collect, the proof that confirms what you already think you are, that is a deposit. The moment you avoid the thing that would contradict your current self-image, that is a deposit. Every single day, without your awareness or consent, the ledger grows. Compound or corrode, those are the only two directions available. What you are about to hear is not about motivation. It is not about thinking more positively. It is about understanding a mechanism, one that is already active inside you, and learning to read it the way a serious investor reads a rate of return. By the time this is over, you will not see yourself the same way, not because something was added, because something is finally visible that was always there. Chapter 1. Your identity has an interest rate. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen understood something about accumulation, not just the accumulation of land or gold or power, something quieter, something that operated beneath the surface of every choice a person made. Across cultures and centuries, a small number of people seemed to grow in a way that compounded. Their confidence, their capability, their sense of what was possible, it all built on itself in a way that appeared almost unfair to those watching from the outside. The majority of people around them worked just as hard, sometimes harder, but something was different about the ones who expanded. Not their luck, not always their talent, something closer to the relationship they had with their own self-concept. What you are about to hear has been understood and forgotten and understood again. It has never been more important than it is right now, for you, sitting exactly where you are in your life. Because you are already compounding something, the only question is what? Here is a picture. Imagine a chart, one of those simple, elegant graphs that financial advisors love to show people in their 20s. Two lines start at the same point. They look almost identical in the first year. By year 3, there is a small gap. By year 10, one line has curved so sharply upward that the other line, still plodding forward in a nearly straight path, barely registers in comparison. You have seen this chart before. You have probably nodded at it in a school classroom or a YouTube video and thought, yes, compound interest, start early, I get it. But here is what nobody told you when they showed you that chart. That chart is not just about money. That chart is a picture of you. What has your identity been compounding for the last 5 years? Do not answer that yet. Sit with the question. Let it stay open, because the answer will mean more once you understand the mechanism behind it. Most people believe that identity is something you discover. You explore the world, you have experiences, and at some point you land on a self, a permanent, stable self. This is who I am. This is what I am capable of. This is how much I am worth. And once that landing happens, consciously or not, most people treat it as settled, as done. They stop questioning it and start defending it. The self-concept calcifies. Every new experience gets filtered through it rather than allowed to challenge it. A compliment becomes a fluke. A failure becomes confirmation. The belief stays intact. Every piece of evidence that life offers gets sorted into two piles. The pile that proves the belief right and the pile that gets quietly ignored. That is not discovery. That is a prison with no visible walls. Here is what nobody told you, and here is why it matters more than any financial advice you have ever received. Every belief you hold about yourself is not a static fact. It is a rate. It is accruing. It is paying interest into your behavior, your decisions, your relationships, and the opportunities you even allow yourself to see every single day. The belief compounds forward. It does not wait for you to be ready. It does not pause because life is difficult. It runs quietly in the background the way interest runs on a loan you forgot you took out. And it is always, always growing. Think about a man named Daniel, not famous, not exceptional at the start. Daniel was 26, working a decent job in logistics, earning enough to live on but not enough to feel like he was going anywhere. He told himself a story. The story was simple. He was practical, not creative. He was good with systems, not with people. He was stable, not ambitious. He had repeated that story so many times in so many small moments that it had become invisible to him. The way a hum from a refrigerator becomes invisible to the person who lives with it. He stopped noticing it was running. But his choices heard it, every single one. He passed on a lateral move into client relations because, he told himself, that was a people role and he was not a people person. He declined to pitch an idea to his manager because it felt too visible, too exposed, and people like him did not do things like that. 3 years passed. Nothing dramatic happened. No disaster. No obvious failure. Just 3 years of quiet decisions, each one perfectly consistent with the story, each one feeding it a little more interest, making it a little more true, a little more cemented. And then one day he sat across from a colleague who had started the same year as him, was now managing a team, and was earning nearly double what Daniel earned. Same starting point, same company, different rate of belief. Let that land for a moment before we move forward. Daniel's story is not a story about talent. It is not a story about unfairness. It is a story about compounding. His colleague had made different small choices, powered by a slightly different story. Those small choices had accumulated into a completely different life trajectory. Same chart, 2 different lines, one that curved, one that did not. Here is what is hard to hear about this. Daniel was not lying to himself. The story he told, practical, not creative, stable, not ambitious. It felt true. It felt accurate. It felt like honest self-knowledge, the kind that people respect when they say things like, "I know who I am." But there is a difference between knowing who you are and knowing who you have been compounding. Daniel knew who he had been compounding. He thought that was the same thing. It is not. Return to the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it, not as an abstract exercise. Really go there. The apartment, the job, the conversations you were having with yourself at midnight when things were quiet. What were the limits you were quietly accepting? What were the doors you had decided were not for you, not because you had tried and failed, but because the story said they were for a different kind of person? Now look at the last 3 years. Look at what compounded, because something did. It always does. The question is always the same. Did it compound in the direction of the person you are capable of becoming? Or did it compound in the direction of the person your old story said you were allowed to be? This is the invisible ledger. Every person carries one. It is not written down anywhere you can see it, but it is being maintained with perfect precision by the part of your mind that filters experience, makes predictions, and decides in advance what is worth trying. Every reinforcement of a belief, every small action that confirms an identity, every time you say yes to what the story says you are or no to what the story says you are not, that is an entry in the ledger. And the ledger compounds. This is not a metaphor, this is the mechanism. Now here is the part that changes things. If you can compound limitation, you can compound expansion. The same mechanism, the same math. The only difference is the rate you are feeding. A belief that you are capable of learning difficult things. That belief, reinforced on a Tuesday with a small act of doing a difficult thing, reinforced again on a Thursday, reinforced again the following week, that belief builds interest. It pays forward. It changes what you see when you look at an opportunity. It changes what you hear when someone offers you something hard. It changes the internal filter from "that is not for me" to "let me find out if it can be for me." That shift is not dramatic. It does not feel like revelation when it happens. It feels like a small decision. But small decisions with a consistent direction are the only thing the compound curve requires. Further on, we will get to a point about motivation and action that clashes with the familiar story. When that becomes clear, it shifts the order in which you do nearly everything. But before you get there, come back to the question left open at the beginning of this chapter. What has your identity been compounding for the last 5 years? You can answer it now. Not out loud, not to anyone else, just to yourself. Be specific. Not "I have been compounding fear" or "I have been compounding confidence." Specific. What exact story has been running? What exact decisions has it been producing? What line on the chart have you been quietly drawing without realizing it was a line? Because the moment you see the rate is no longer invisible. And a rate you can see is a rate you can change. You are not behind. You are simply compounding the wrong belief at the wrong rate. And this is the moment you find out that you have always had the ability to set a different one. Every belief you reinforce is paying interest into your future. The only question worth asking now is whether you chose the rate or whether the rate chose you. Chapter 2. The beliefs already winning without your permission. Most people believe that their limiting beliefs are the problem. They have heard this 1,000 times. They nod along, they even agree. But here is what almost no one tells you. The belief is not the problem. The belief is already the solution. Your mind adopted every limiting story you carry because at some point that story kept you safe. It kept you small enough to avoid a pain you were not ready to face. So the belief is not failing you. It is working exactly as designed. The disturbing part, the part that should stop you mid-sentence, is that you never updated the design. You are running a program that solved a problem you no longer have, in a life that no longer exists, toward a future you never consciously chose. And it has been running quietly every single day, compounding. That last word still hangs in the air. Every belief you reinforce is paying interest into your future. The only question worth asking is whether you chose the rate, or whether the rate chose you. This chapter exists to answer a harder version of that question. Not just who set the rate, but what exactly is being compounded right now, without your permission, without your awareness, underneath the daily noise of your ordinary life. There is something you might call the invisible ledger of self. Think of it the way a bank thinks about your account. Every transaction is recorded. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every compounding cycle. Most people never look at their ledger. Not because they are lazy, but because nobody ever told them it existed. You have a ledger. It has been running since you were young enough to absorb the world without the defenses to question it. Every belief you have held about money, about your own worth, about what people like you are allowed to expect from life, those are entries. And they are not sitting still. Here is the open loop this chapter wants you to hold. There is a type of belief that does not feel like a belief at all. It feels like reality. It feels like simple observation. And it is the most costly entry in your entire ledger. You will know exactly what it is before this chapter ends. But first, you need to see the 4 categories of belief most likely compounding in the wrong direction inside you right now. The first category is the belief about deserving. This one runs deep and quiet. It does not usually say out loud that you do not deserve things. It is more subtle than that. It says things like, I am not really the type of person who ends up wealthy. Or, people from where I come from grind hard and get by, and that is a dignified life. Or it says nothing at all. It simply generates hesitation in the exact moment an opportunity appears. You feel it as a slight pull backward. A second guessing. A voice that suggests you are getting ahead of yourself. That voice is a belief about deserving. Every time you comply with it, every time you pull back, you make a deposit in the wrong column of your ledger. Small deposits, daily deposits, compounding deposits. A man named Robert grew up watching his father work overtime every Friday and still apologize to the landlord on the first of every month. Robert was not taught that money was bad. Nobody sat him down and said, "You are not meant for more than this." What Robert learned was visual. He learned it through repetition. He watched the geometry of his father's life: work hard, fall short, apologize, repeat. By the time Robert was in his late 20s, earning decent money at a logistics company, he was unconsciously recreating the same geometry. Every time a raise opportunity appeared, he talked himself out of asking. Every time he had money saved, a reason to spend it arrived right on schedule. He was not self-sabotaging in any dramatic sense. He was simply honoring an old instruction about who gets to keep money and who is just passing it through. Robert had never once examined that instruction. He had never asked whether it was true. He had only inherited it and filed it under the heading of just how things are. One afternoon, Robert sat down with a single question. What did I decide about money before I had any real experience with it? That one question cracked something open. Not every revelation requires a dramatic moment. Some arrive as a quiet cracking sound, like something shifting in a wall you had stopped looking at. The second category is the belief about visibility. This one is particularly common in people who grew up watching ambition get mocked, or watching the people who spoke up get cut down, or watching someone they admired get humiliated for wanting too much. The resulting belief sounds like this: stay modest, stay under the radar, do not make yourself a target. There is wisdom buried inside that belief. Real wisdom. The kind earned through real pain. But compounded over a decade, that wisdom becomes a cage. It produces people who work harder than almost anyone around them but never ask to be seen for it. People who produce quietly and wait to be discovered. People who operate on the assumption that merit, alone, eventually rises. Merit does not rise on its own. Merit requires signal. And if your belief about visibility is actively suppressing the signal, you are working for a return that will never come. The third category is the belief about time. It sounds like this: I am too far behind to catch up now. Or its cousin: once I get the next thing sorted, then I will focus on building something real. Time-based beliefs are dangerous precisely because they feel rational. They feel like planning. They feel like patience, even. But there is a specific kind of delay that is not patience. It is avoidance wearing the clothes of strategy. If you have been waiting for the right moment to start compounding your identity in the direction you actually want, you have been paying interest on a belief that your window is either closing or not yet open. Neither version is true. But both versions are expensive. Picture the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it. Not where you thought you would be. Not the plan. Where you actually were. What did you believe then that you still believe today? What conversations did you have with yourself about timing and readiness and not quite being there yet? If those conversations sound familiar, if they sound almost identical to the ones you are having right now, then time is not the variable. The belief about time is the variable, and it has been accruing cost for 3 years without a single payment in return. The fourth category is the most invisible. This is the one promised at the start of this chapter. It is the belief that does not feel like a belief at all. It is the belief that your identity is fixed, that you are a specific kind of person, that the characteristics you have now are the characteristics that define you, rather than the characteristics you have simply compounded most consistently. This belief does not announce itself. It operates as a background assumption. It shows up when you say, "I am not a numbers person," or "I am just not someone who takes risks," or "I have always been bad at putting myself out there." Those are not observations. Those are compounded behaviors wearing the mask of permanent fact. They are entries in your invisible ledger that have been building so long they now look like the ledger itself. This is the critical distinction. Your beliefs are not describing you. Your beliefs are constructing you. Every day that distinction goes unexamined, the construction continues. And the compound effect does not wait for you to be ready. It runs anyway. Soon, we will get to a point about self-discipline and willpower that clashes with the familiar story. After that clicks, it shifts what you actually do each morning before the rest of the world is awake. But right now, the work is simpler and more demanding than any technique. The work is to sit with your own ledger, not to fix it, not yet, just to see it. The 4 belief categories in this chapter are not theoretical. They are operational. They are running right now, inside the decisions you are deferring, inside the opportunities you are letting pass without fully registering why, inside the quiet pull backward every time something asks you to step forward. Your ledger has 2 columns. One compounds toward the life you have not yet claimed. One compounds toward the version of yourself that your oldest stories have already decided you are. Both columns are filling, whether or not you are watching. So here is the question that closes this loop and opens the next. If someone else could read every entry in your invisible ledger, every belief reinforced in silence over the last 5 years, what would they say your ledger is building toward? Chapter 3. Tiny beliefs become architectural over time. The belief doing the most damage to your financial life right now is not the one you know about. That sounds backwards. You would expect the obvious ones, the fears you can name, the doubts you openly acknowledge to be the most destructive. They are not. The beliefs you have stopped noticing are the ones that are quietly load-bearing. They hold up the entire structure of how you make decisions, how you respond to opportunity, how much you allow yourself to want. The reason you have stopped noticing them is simple. They have been reinforced so many times over so many years that they no longer feel like beliefs at all. They feel like facts about the world. They feel like you. That distinction between a repeated thought and a structural truth is what this chapter is about. By the time you reach the end of it, the most ordinary moment of your week will look completely different to you. Here is the question you are carrying from the last chapter. If someone could read every entry in your invisible ledger, every belief reinforced in silence over the last 5 years, what would they say your ledger is building toward? Hold that question. Do not answer it yet. Before you can answer it honestly, you need to understand how the ledger becomes a building. Think about the way a house is constructed, not the decorative parts, the paint, the furniture, the way the light falls in the afternoon. Think about the walls you cannot see behind the drywall, the ones that cannot be removed without consequences. Structural engineers call them load-bearing walls. Take one of those walls out and the ceiling does not just sag. The whole thing comes down. Your belief system works exactly this way. Some beliefs are decorative. You picked them up recently, they sit lightly, and letting them go costs you almost nothing. But some beliefs are load-bearing. They were installed early. They were reinforced constantly. Every subsequent decision you made was built on top of them, which means they now hold up a staggering amount of weight. And here is what makes this dangerous. You cannot tell which ones are decorative and which ones are structural just by looking at the surface. A belief held daily for 1 year is not a thought anymore. It is infrastructure, and dismantling it requires deliberate force. Let that sit for a moment before moving past it. Marcus was 31 years old and worked as a logistics coordinator for a regional shipping company in Ohio. He was good at his job, reliable and consistently underpaid by about 40% relative to his market value. He knew this. He had run the numbers himself. He had looked up salaries in comparable roles at comparable companies and confirmed that the gap was real. But every time he approached the edge of asking for a raise or applying for a position at a better-paying company, something stopped him. He described it as a kind of internal resistance he could not name. He called it nerves. He called it bad timing. He called it not wanting to rock the boat. One evening, Marcus sat down with a notebook and wrote a single question at the top of the page. The question was, "What is the first memory I have of money being refused to me?" He did not expect anything useful. He was doing it because a friend suggested it and he had run out of other explanations. What came up was a Saturday morning when he was 9 years old. He had asked his father for $3 to buy a small model car at a garage sale down the street. His father had looked up from the newspaper and said, without malice, without cruelty, simply as a statement of fact, "We are not the kind of people who spend money on things like that." That was it. One sentence. No argument, no elaboration. Marcus had walked away and forgotten it within an hour. Except he had not forgotten it. He had filed it. In the 22 years since that morning, he had reached for things and stopped himself approximately 10,000 times using a version of that same logic. We are not the kind of people. He had never once said those exact words out loud, but he had lived them every single time opportunity appeared and he chose not to reach. That one sentence from a Saturday morning in Ohio became a load-bearing wall. Everything Marcus had built since, every salary he accepted, every negotiation he declined, Every ambition he quietly mothballed had been built on top of it. Here is where most people make a mistake when they hear a story like Marcus's. They hear it as a story about damage, about a wound that needs healing, about going back and rewriting the past. That framing is not wrong exactly, but it points you in the wrong direction. What Marcus discovered was not just the source of the limitation. He discovered the mechanism. A single belief, repeated as a silent refrain approximately 10,000 times over 22 years, had reached a level of compounding so extreme that it had become architecturally indistinguishable from reality. He could not feel the difference between that belief and the floor beneath his feet. The rate of belief is everything. When you hold a belief daily, even a small one, even one that seems harmless in isolation, you are not keeping it the same size. You are compounding it. A small negative claim about who you are, reinforced every morning when you decline to speak up in a meeting, every afternoon when you accept less than you asked for, every evening when you scroll past an opportunity and tell yourself it is not for someone like you, that belief does not stay small. It earns interest. It grows weight. It recruits evidence. Every confirmation makes it slightly more structural, slightly more load-bearing, slightly harder to see around. Revisit the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it. Not in your career, not in your bank account, in your beliefs about what was available to you. Think about the quiet sentences you repeated most often. Think about the spaces you did not enter because you had already decided you did not belong there. Now think about where those beliefs have compounded to, not as a judgment, as an observation. The ledger has been running. The question is whether it has been running in your favor. That is the mirror moment this chapter is asking you to hold, not comfortably. With the lights on, here is what makes this principle genuinely difficult to accept. The most dangerous compounding beliefs rarely feel negative when they are being reinforced. They feel like clarity. They feel like self-awareness. They feel like being realistic. Someone who has spent 10 years reinforcing the belief that financial success requires connections, they does not feel like someone building a prison. They feel like someone who understands how the world actually works. The belief has matured to the point where it no longer feels like an opinion. It presents itself as information. This is the moment to introduce an idea you will find developed further later in this book. You will encounter something that directly contradicts what most people believe about hard work and financial progress. Once you grasp that turn, it shifts how you act every single morning. But the groundwork for that moment is being laid right now, in this chapter, in this architectural metaphor. Because the thing that makes hard work compound or corrode is not the work itself. It is the belief running underneath it. Now come back to Marcus. His story does not end at the Saturday morning memory. Once Marcus identified the load-bearing belief, he did not try to remove it all at once. He was smart enough to understand that you cannot pull a structural wall without consequence. Instead, he did something that seems almost absurdly small. He began inserting a single counterclaim into each moment of refusal. When his internal voice said, "We are not the kind of people," he added one sentence, "But I am deciding what kind of person I am right now." He did not believe it immediately. He did not need to. He was not trying to win an argument with a belief. He was trying to begin compounding against it, at the same daily rate it had been compounding against him. Within 4 months, Marcus had applied for 3 positions at other companies. Within 8 months, he had accepted one at a salary 60% higher than what he had been earning. He did not become a different person in some theatrical way. He made one counterclaim, at the same daily rate as the belief he was opposing, and let time do what time always does with consistent inputs. Compound or corrode. There is no neutral. Every belief in your ledger is either building something or wearing something away, and it is doing so every single time you reinforce it, whether you intend to or not. The invisible ledger you carry is not a record of your past. It is the blueprint of your future choices. Every entry you make today, every time you affirm a belief about who you are allowed to be, what you are allowed to want, where you are allowed to go, becomes material. It becomes structural over time. It becomes the frame inside which all your future decisions will be made, without you ever realizing the frame is there. This is why two people with identical circumstances, identical education, identical opportunities standing side by side can produce different outcomes over 10 years. Not because of luck, not because of access, because the belief compounding inside one of them was running at a different rate in a different direction than the belief compounding inside the other. A belief held daily for 1 year is not a thought, it is infrastructure. So here is the question that closes this loop and opens what comes next. If your beliefs are architectural, and architecture can be deliberately redesigned, then what is the smallest structural change you could make today that, compounded daily for 1 year, would produce a building you actually want to live inside? Chapter 4. The rate of belief determines everything downstream. Something is draining right now and you cannot see it. Not money from a bank account, not time from a clock, something quieter and more expensive than either of those. Every hour you spend operating from a belief about yourself that is smaller than what is true, you are paying a price, not once, repeatedly, daily. The belief that you are not quite ready, the belief that people like you do not get to that place, the belief that you are still figuring it out. Each one of those is not just a thought you had today. It is interest accruing on a loan you never agreed to take out. And here is the part that does not get said enough. The cost is not in the belief itself. The cost is in the rate, how often you rehearse it. How many times per day that small interior voice confirms the smaller version of you. That frequency is the mechanism, and most people have never once looked at it directly. This chapter is about looking directly at it. That question from the last chapter is worth sitting with for a moment. If your beliefs are architectural and architecture can be redesigned, then what is the smallest structural change you could make today that, compounded daily for a year, would produce a building you actually want to live inside? That question asked about size. The smallest change. But there is a second variable hidden inside it, and most people never pull it out. The variable is not how big the change is. It is how often the change is applied. This chapter opens with one question still hanging in the air until the section closes it. You probably already believe something true and useful about yourself. Something that, if it ran at full compounding speed, would change your financial position, your relationships, your sense of daily purpose within 12 months. The question is not whether you have the belief. The question is what rate it is currently running at. Hold that question. The answer is coming. But first you need to understand why rate matters more than almost anything else you have been told about belief. Think about two investors. Same starting amount, $1,000 each. The first investor earns 3% annually. The second investor earns 9% annually. After 10 years, the first investor has about $1,300. The second investor has more than $2,300. Same principle, same time period. The only difference is the rate. Now stretch that to 30 years. The first investor ends with $2,400. The second investor ends with 13,000. 13,000 against 2,400. Same starting point, same discipline. The only variable that was different was the rate at which the money compounded. Your beliefs work exactly this way. The principle is the belief itself. The rate is how frequently you reinforce it. A belief you hold once and then forget is 3% interest. It grows slowly, if at all. A belief you actively rehearse, return to, and confirm through your daily actions and inner narration, that belief is running at 9%, at 12%, maybe higher. Over time, the gap between those two people is not small. It is the difference between a life that feels vaguely possible and one that feels structurally built in your direction. This is what the rate of belief means. And once you understand it, you will never look at self-doubt the same way again, because you will realize that the most damaging beliefs you carry are not the intense ones. They are the frequent ones, the quiet, low-grade repetitions, the ones you barely notice because they have been running so long they feel like facts. There is a woman named Carla who grew up in a house where money was discussed only in terms of what the family did not have. Not lavishly discussed, not dramatically, just consistently. Every grocery trip, a small calculation. Every school event, a quiet logistical worry. Every news story about the economy, a private reinforcement of the same theme. By the time Carla was 26 and working in a decent job in a mid-sized city, she earned more than her parents ever had. But she still checked her bank account the way someone checks a wound. Still braced slightly every time an unexpected cost appeared. Still felt a low hum of financial danger even in weeks when nothing was wrong. Carla was not broken. She had simply inherited a belief rate. Her family's household had run one particular belief, not loudly, not maliciously, but at very high frequency for 18 years. That compounded. She carried the accumulated total into her adult life without knowing it had been deposited there. When she finally put a name to the frequency, when she started tracking how many times in a day she thought about money in terms of threat rather than resource, she counted 11 times before noon. 11 quiet rehearsals of the older belief, before lunch. She did not need a new belief as much as she needed a new rate. The story does not end there, but let that settle for one moment before continuing, because there is something important in Carla's count that is easy to miss. 11 times before noon. Think about your own day, not the big moments, the small ones, the passing thought when you see someone in a car that feels out of reach, the internal edit you make before speaking in a meeting, the half-second calculation before suggesting something at dinner. These are rehearsals. Every single one. And they are running whether you are paying attention or not, compound or corrode. Those are the only two options. There is no neutral. There is no day where the ledger simply stays flat. Every rehearsal either adds to the version of you that is growing, or it confirms the version of you that has already been decided. Here is the mirror moment. Call up the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it, not in grand terms. Think about the specific internal narration, the things you assumed about yourself without examining them, the ceiling you placed on what was possible, not because someone told you to, but because repetition had made it feel structural. Some of that narration has changed. You can feel the places where it has. But some of it, the deeper grooves, the older frequencies, those are still running, still compounding, still producing returns on an investment you may not have consciously chosen. The question is not whether this is happening. It is. The question is, at what rate? This is where the reinforcement frequency audit comes in, not as a performance, as a simple act of honest accounting. For one full day you are going to count your rehearsals, not dramatically, not with judgment. Just as information, the way you would read numbers on a financial statement. Every time you catch a thought, a passing inner comment, a physical reaction, a behavior that confirms a belief about what you can or cannot do, you mark it. 2 columns. One for beliefs that are building the person you are becoming. One for beliefs that are confirming a version of you that no longer fits. At the end of the day, you have a frequency report, a rate of belief audit. Most people who do this for the first time are startled, not because the negative column is catastrophically full, but because the positive column is almost empty, not from lack of effort, from lack of attention. You are already doing the work of building, but you are not running the belief frequently enough for the compounding to take hold. The rate is too low, and a good belief running at 3% is losing ground to an old belief running at 12%. Here is the revelation this whole chapter has been building toward. It is not the size of a belief that determines its power. It is the frequency at which it is rehearsed. A small belief, confidently and repeatedly rehearsed, will outcompound a large, inspiring belief that only surfaces when you are already motivated. Motivation is not the engine. Frequency is the engine. Later on, we will get to a point about conviction that clashes with the familiar story. When that point settles, it shifts how you act on even your most difficult days. But right now, stay with frequency. Because this is where most people lose years without knowing it. They spend enormous energy trying to believe bigger things. They search for the perfect affirmation, the right morning ritual, the book that finally makes it click. And none of that is wasted, but it misses the variable that matters most. A belief you revisit twice a week is not compounding. It is treading water. A belief you rehearse 11 times before noon, even a small, honest, unglamorous belief that one is building something real. Carla eventually did something simple. She did not try to become a different person. She picked one thing she already believed about herself that was true and useful, one specific thing, that she was steady in a crisis. She had always known this. It had shown up repeatedly. But she had never named it, never returned to it, never used it as a foundation. She began rehearsing it, not as a performance. As a fact she returned to daily, the way you return to a known calculation when the numbers get confusing. Within 4 months, the way she moved through financial decisions had changed. Not because the belief was new, because the rate had changed. The invisible ledger of self does not care about your intentions. It does not care about your aspirations or your potential or how much you want things to be different. It records what you rehearse. It compounds what runs most often. This is not cruel. It is mathematical. And mathematics, unlike motivation, does not require you to feel ready. The open loop from early in this chapter now closes here. You do hold a useful belief. And the rate it is running at is almost certainly lower than it needs to be. That is not a failure. That is information. Information you can act on today, not by believing harder, but by believing more often. Frequency is the mechanism. The rate of belief is the rate of your return. So here is what carries you into the next chapter. If frequency determines the compounding rate, then the deliberate construction of your daily rehearsal environment is not optional. It is the design work. And designing a day around a chosen frequency requires understanding exactly what conditions kill the rate before the interest can accrue. Chapter 5. How to interrupt compounding in real time. Stopping a belief mid-cycle is more powerful than replacing it entirely. That sounds backwards. Every piece of advice you have ever heard about changing your thinking tells you to swap the bad thought for a better one. But it is not backwards. Replacement requires you to have a new belief ready, loaded, and stronger than the one currently running. Interruption requires nothing except the presence of mind to recognize the loop has started. Here is the thing. The loop has a seam. There is a precise moment, a hairline gap between the trigger and the thought completing itself, where the whole chain is vulnerable. Most people walk past that gap every single day without ever knowing it exists. This chapter is about finding it and using it, not tomorrow, not after 3 weeks of journaling. In the next moment, a familiar limiting story begins to play. You already have what you need. What you have been missing is the exact move. Now think about what carries you here from the last chapter. Frequency determines the compounding rate, which means if something is quietly compounding in the wrong direction, it is doing so because it has been allowed to complete its cycle over and over, uninterrupted. The rate of belief does not care whether the belief is expanding you or corroding you. It compounds either way. And the conditions that kill a healthy rate are the same conditions that protect a damaging one. So here is the question this chapter needs to answer. What does it actually mean to interrupt a loop? Not dismiss it, not wrestle with it, not perform a 5-minute breathing exercise in a quiet room with no notifications. What does it mean to stop the chain in the ordinary chaos of a Tuesday afternoon when the loop fires and you have approximately 3 seconds? The answer is not what you expect. There was a contractor named Marcus, 31 years old, who built custom decking and outdoor structures in a mid-sized city in the South. He was good at his work. Clients recommended him. His schedule was full almost every season. But every time a larger commercial bid came across his desk, something happened before he even opened the documents. His chest would tighten. His reading would slow. By the time he reached the project scope, he had already begun doing the math in a particular way, calculating all the ways the bid could collapse. He would find a reason it was not right for him, too much liability. Too many subcontractors to coordinate, not really his lane. He would pass on the bid, feel a brief wash of relief, and within 24 hours that relief would curdle into a low, dull sense that he had made a mistake. Again, Marcus came to understand something about this pattern that most people never identify. The decision to pass was not where the loop completed. The loop completed the moment he labeled the bid as something outside his lane. The moment he applied that label, his identity on the invisible ledger recorded it, filed it. And the next bid came, and the label was already waiting, and the gap between the trigger and the thought got shorter. He was not making a decision each time. He was executing a stored instruction. He did not need a better attitude about commercial bids. He needed to break the instruction before it finished running. Here is the concrete version of that once it leaves theory. Here is the 3-step sequence that makes it possible. The first step is locate the seam. Before the thought finishes, there is a physical signal. Always. Your body responds faster than your language does. That is why the tightening in Marcus's chest arrived before the rationalizations. That physical signal is the seam. You are not looking for the thought. You are looking for the sensation that precedes it. In your own life, this might be a change in your breathing, a dropping sensation in your stomach, a subtle urge to look at your phone, a quickening in your pulse. The sensation will be specific to you, but it will repeat, because the loop always starts the same way. Your job in step 1 is only to notice it, not judge it, not analyze it. Just name it to yourself in a single word: tight, heavy, fast. One word. That word is the first break in the chain. Bring to mind the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it. How many times a day did a loop fire inside you that you had no name for, no handle on, no way to interrupt? It ran. It completed. It filed its entry in the ledger. You felt its effects but could not locate its source. That version of you did not have the language or the attention to catch the seam. But you are building both of those things right now in this chapter with this framework. The distance between who you were then and who you are capable of being is not talent or time or money. It is the precision of your attention. The second step is the physical anchor. Here is where most people stumble. They are taught that the interruption is purely cognitive. Think a different thought. Reframe the belief. But a belief that is mid-cycle has momentum. Cognitive instruction does not stop momentum. Physical action does. The anchor should be simple, simple enough to execute in any environment without attracting attention. A deliberate press of 2 fingers against your palm. A single full exhale through your mouth. 1 deliberate heel planted hard into the floor beneath you. It does not matter which you choose. What matters is that you choose one and you use it every single time. The consistency builds a new association. Over time, the physical anchor begins to carry information. Your nervous system starts to read it as, we are not proceeding automatically. We are here. We are choosing. That is not metaphor. That is the practical result of repetition building a new signal. Marcus chose a single action. Every time the tightening appeared, he placed one hand flat on whatever surface was nearest, a table, a truck door, a counter, and applied pressure. It took less than 2 seconds. It created what he later described as a small pocket of space that had not existed before. Space is exactly the right word. The third step is the replacement question. Not the replacement thought, the replacement question. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this method. A replacement thought requires you to assert something. It requires a level of belief in the new statement that you may not yet have. If the loop tells you that you are not the kind of person who handles large commercial bids, and you try to counter it by asserting, I am fully capable of handling large commercial bids, you are likely to hear your own resistance immediately. The assertion feels hollow. The loop wins. But a question is not an assertion. A question does not require you to believe anything. A question only asks you to look. The replacement question is this. Ask yourself, what would someone who does handle this kind of thing notice right now that I am choosing not to notice? That is the full question. It is not a pep talk. It is not an affirmation. It is a perceptual redirect. You are not asking yourself to become someone else. You are asking yourself to borrow a set of eyes for approximately 10 seconds and look at the situation through them. Marcus asked that question when the next commercial bid came across his desk. The tightening arrived. He caught it. One hand on the counter. Pressure. Then the question. What would someone who takes these bids see here that I am choosing not to see? He sat with it. For the first time, he did not immediately look for the problems. He looked at the budget line. He looked at the timeline. He looked at one section of the scope he actually understood very well. The bid did not become easy, but the loop did not complete. He submitted a proposal 3 days later for the largest project of his career, not because he fixed his beliefs, because he interrupted the loop once, just once. And once the chain breaks, the previous entry in the ledger does not automatically write itself. Here is what you need to understand about why this works at the level of compounding. A belief can only compound if it completes its loop. The invisible ledger only records a completed transaction. When the loop is interrupted at the seam before it finishes, the entry does not get filed. The interest does not accrue. The rate does not increase. One interruption does not undo years of compounding in the old direction. but it does stop the debt from growing. And the next time the loop fires and you interrupt it again, you are doing something with an almost invisible but cumulative effect. You are reducing the rate, slightly, and then again, and again. This is compound or corrode applied to the mechanism itself. Every completion of the old loop is a deposit into a ledger that is working against you. Every interruption is a payment that reduces the balance. Enough interruptions, close enough together, and the loop begins to lose its speed. The gap between the trigger and the thought gets wider instead of narrower. As this book keeps moving, we will get to a point about how long-lasting change actually takes that clashes with the familiar story. After that really registers, it shifts how fast you are willing to act. But for now, start here. One loop. One seam. One physical anchor. One question. 3 steps that together take less than a minute to execute. And what they protect is not your mood for the afternoon. What they protect is the trajectory your identity is currently on. Every loop that completes uninterrupted steepens that trajectory in its direction. Every loop you break before it closes is a fractional redirection, small on any given day, enormous over any meaningful span of time. The rate of belief is always accumulating something. The only question is whether you are the one deciding what. Chapter 6. Redirecting compound force is not starting over. You are already moving. That is the thing nobody tells you. Right now, today, your identity is not sitting still waiting for you to decide what to do with it. It is traveling. It has velocity. And every day you spend believing that change requires a full demolition, that you must tear down who you have been before you can build who you want to be, is a day that velocity carries you further from where you actually want to go. The loss is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply accumulates. The way a ship drifts off course by a single degree and arrives at the wrong shore after 3,000 miles at sea. You do not need more willpower. You do not need a breakdown, a revelation, or a rock bottom. You need to understand one thing clearly. Momentum already exists inside you. The only question is whether you are the one deciding what to do with it. That question, the one the last chapter left you standing in front of, is exactly where this chapter begins. Here is the tension underneath all of that. Most people who want to change their lives believe they are starting from zero. They believe that whoever they have been up to this point is a liability, a weight, something to be overcome before the real work can begin. So they wait. They wait for the right moment to finally become a different person, as if identity were a coat they could hang up one morning and replace with something better. And while they wait, the compounding continues. Not forward, not backward. Simply in the direction they were already going. Think about the numbers for a moment. In finance, a single degree of difference in your annual return rate does not look like much in year 1. The difference between 8% growth and 9% growth over 12 months is almost invisible. But give that difference 30 years, and you are talking about outcomes that have almost no resemblance to each other. The 8% account and the 9% account start at the same place. 30 years later, they are living in different worlds, not because of a dramatic event, because of 1 degree held consistently, compounded over time. Your identity works the same way. 1 small, repeated shift in how you see yourself does not look like much in week 1. It barely registers in month 3. But hold that shift at 1 degree for 18 months, and you are a different person standing in a different room making different decisions. Not because you burned down who you were, because you bent the arc just enough, just consistently enough, for compound interest to do what compound interest always does. Now here is what most people get wrong about this. They hear small shifts and they think small results. They confuse the size of the action with the size of the outcome. But the action is not the point. The direction is the point. And a single sustained degree of direction change over time is not a small outcome. It is a completely different destination. There is a man named Darius. He is not famous. He will never be on a podcast. But 18 months before his 32nd birthday, Darius was managing a mid-size print shop his father had started, earning enough to pay his bills, spending his evenings watching other people's highlight reels on a phone screen. And he was telling himself quietly, consistently, daily, that he was not the kind of person who built things from scratch. He was a maintainer, a steady hand, the person who kept existing things running. That story, he told himself, was not dramatic. It was not cruel. It was just precise enough to feel true, and it compounded every single day. The shift Darius made was not a big one. He did not quit his job. He did not take out a loan. He did not announce anything to anyone. He changed one sentence. One single sentence he said to himself when he looked at a problem. He used to say, "That is not really my area." He started saying, "Let me figure out how that works." 4 words swapped for 6. That was it. But those 6 words, repeated, accumulated. They sent him toward different conversations, different reading, different questions he asked people at industry events he had been attending for years without really engaging. 12 months in, he had quietly developed a working knowledge of print-on-demand logistics that his father had never thought to pursue. Not because Darius was smarter, because he had bent the arc 1 degree and held it. At month 18, a regional retailer approached the shop about a fulfillment partnership that tripled their monthly revenue in 6 months. Darius did not see himself as a business builder. He had simply become one. The compounding had done the rest. That is not a story about hustle. It is not a story about discipline or sacrifice. It is a story about the rate of belief. What you tell yourself about yourself every single day earns interest. Compound or corrode. There is no neutral position. Here is where the open loop you have been carrying through this chapter begins to close. Earlier, the question was this: if you are already moving, already accumulating, already compounding in some direction, then who decides the direction? Most people expect the answer to be, you do, consciously, deliberately, with great effort. But the real answer is more specific than that. The direction is decided by the story you tell yourself in the ordinary moments, not in the dramatic ones. Not when you are standing at a crossroads or facing a crisis. In the ordinary ones, the Tuesday afternoon moments, the quiet hour before sleep, the micro conversation you have with yourself when something does not go the way you wanted. That is the invisible ledger of self. Every entry either compounds your sense of what is possible for you or it corrodes it. And most people are not even aware they are making entries. Here is your mirror moment. Go back to the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it. Not where you wanted to be, where you actually were. What did you believe about money 3 years ago? What did you believe about your own earning capacity? About whether people like you in your specific situation with your specific history got to build real financial lives or just managed them? Now look at today. The beliefs you held 3 years ago, did they compound forward into today? Can you trace the line? Because that line is always there. It does not disappear just because you are not looking at it. The compound interest chart of your self-concept has been running the whole time. The question is what it shows. Now here is the revelation. And it is simple enough to sound too simple, which is why most people miss it. You do not need to destroy who you have been to become who you are going to be. You need to bend the compounding arc. 1 degree. One small, true, repeated shift in the direction of a self-concept that is slightly more accurate than the limited one you inherited. Not a new identity, a redirected one. The rocket analogy makes this concrete. When NASA launches a probe toward a distant planet, that rocket does not travel in a perfect straight line. It corrects constantly. Tiny burns of the thruster, fractions of a degree at a time, guided by where it needs to go rather than rigidly attached to the initial trajectory. The rocket does not apologize for where it has been. It does not mourn the fuel spent getting here. It simply recalculates and adjusts over and over for the entire journey. You are that rocket. The compounding is the fuel. And the adjustment, the micro-shift in direction, is always available to you. A probe that began at Earth and corrected its course by 2 degrees in the first hour will arrive at an entirely different planet than one that never corrected at all. 2 degrees, held, compounded over 18 months, a different planet entirely. Here is what this means for you in practice. You are not looking for the grand gesture. You are not looking for the morning when you wake up and feel completely transformed. Those mornings come later, and they come as a result of accumulated redirection, not as a prerequisite for it. What you are looking for right now is the one sentence, the one small, consistent thing you say about yourself in the moments that nobody else hears, because that sentence earns interest. That sentence, over 400 days, becomes a belief. That belief, over the following 400 days, becomes a behavior. And that behavior becomes what other people see when they look at you and decide what to offer you, what to trust you with, what to bring to your door. The invisible ledger is always open. The rate of belief is always running, and redirecting it does not require burning the ledger. It requires changing the entry you make today. In a later section, we will get to a point about the speed at which identity change is supposed to feel that clashes with the familiar story. Once that becomes real to you, it shifts how you measure your own progress entirely. But for now, hold this. You are not starting over. You never were. You are a compounding force that has been traveling in a particular direction. And you have just discovered that the direction is adjustable. The adjustments are small, and the mathematics of those small adjustments are extraordinary. The question is not whether you can change who you are. The question is whether the 1 degree you shift today is one you choose, or one that simply happens to you. Chapter 7. Build your identity portfolio deliberately. Spreading yourself thin is actually the smartest financial move you can make. That sounds like advice someone gives to justify being mediocre at many things rather than excellent at one. It is not. It is the foundational logic behind every wealth-building system that has survived more than 2 generations. And almost nobody has ever thought to apply it to the only asset that generates every other asset they will ever have, who they believe they are. You have heard that you need to focus. Go deep, not wide. Pick your lane. Commit. In many contexts, that is true. But there is one place where total concentration creates catastrophic fragility. That place is your self-concept. When you build your entire identity on a single story about who you are, you have not created strength. You have created a single point of failure. One bad quarter, one lost job, one relationship that ends, and the whole structure cracks. This chapter is about why that happens, how to see it in your own life right now, and what it looks like to build something more durable. 1 degree of shift chosen deliberately. That is where the previous chapter left you. This chapter answers the next question. Once you are choosing, where exactly do you point it? Here is an open loop that will live with you for a few minutes. There is one category in your identity portfolio, one specific area, where you are almost certainly overexposed. You probably know which one it is already, even if you have never named it. Hold that thought. Do not answer it yet. Let the framework build first, because the answer will mean more once you can see the whole picture. Think about a financial portfolio. A serious investor does not put everything into a single stock, regardless of how much they believe in that company. They hold assets across categories. Some generate slow and steady returns. Some are higher risk with higher potential. Some are held as protection against the categories that might fail. The goal is not maximum return in a single good year. The goal is a compounding rate that survives every year, including the bad ones. Your identity works exactly the same way. Call it your identity portfolio. It is the total collection of beliefs you hold about who you are and what you are capable of across every domain of your life. Most people have never looked at this portfolio deliberately. They have never audited it. They have holdings they did not consciously choose, some deposited by parents, some by early failures, some by one teacher in 7th grade who said something offhand. That comment lodged itself in the invisible ledger of self and has been compounding ever since. The question is not whether you have an identity portfolio. You have one whether you know it or not. The question is whether it is working for you or quietly against you. There are 5 broad categories where identity beliefs tend to cluster. Think of them as asset classes. The first is competence. This is your belief about what you are good at and what you are capable of learning. It covers skills, intelligence, craft, and the confidence that you can figure out what you have not yet figured out. The second is resourcefulness. This is separate from competence, and the distinction matters. Competence is about what you can do. Resourcefulness is about your belief in your ability to find what you need when you do not already have it. People with strong resourcefulness identity do not wait until they feel ready. They trust that they will locate the path while they are walking. The third is relational worth. This is your belief about whether you deserve strong connections, how you show up in relationships, and whether other people find value in your presence. This one runs quieter than the others. It moves underneath the surface of a lot of financial behavior, because many spending patterns are relational worth expressions in disguise. The fourth is durability. This is your belief in your own endurance. Not strength as a static quality, but your capacity to absorb difficulty and continue. People with high durability identity do not collapse the first time a plan fails. They interpret failure as data rather than verdict. The fifth is agency. This is the belief that your actions are meaningfully connected to your outcomes, that what you do today affects what exists for you next year. Agency identity is the engine that makes every other category usable. Without it, competence sits idle. Resourcefulness never gets deployed. Even durability becomes passive endurance rather than active recovery. 5 categories: compound or corrode. That phrase has run through this book because it is the only honest description of how belief systems behave. Every day that passes, your holdings in each of these 5 categories are moving in one direction or the other. Neutrality is not available. The rate of belief is always ticking. Now here is something most people discover when they look at this framework honestly. They are heavily invested in one category and relatively thin in the rest. Consider Marcus. He is 31, working in technical support for a mid-sized software company, genuinely excellent at what he does. His competence identity is strong. He has built it carefully over 8 years. He knows his domain. He knows it. But Marcus has almost nothing in his resourcefulness category. When a problem falls outside his existing knowledge, he freezes. He waits for someone to tell him what to do. He has confused knowing things with being able to find things, and that confusion has kept him from every promotion he has ever been considered for. His durability identity is also thin. One critical performance review 3 years ago convinced him, at a level he never examined, that he does not handle failure well. So he stopped trying things he might fail at. He narrowed his actions down to the territory where his competence identity was already strong. Safe ground only. The result is that an excellent person has spent 3 years compounding his competence inside a smaller and smaller circle, while every other category quietly corrodes. That is a single-stock portfolio. And Marcus is not unusual. Take a moment and sit inside your own holdings. Step back to that earlier point before memory softens it, not as a general exercise, but specifically. What did you believe about your own durability back then? Did something in those 3 years test it? Did you pass that test in a way you never fully recorded in the ledger? Or did something reinforce an existing belief that you cannot handle the hard things? Most people do not audit this. They move from experience to experience without deliberately accounting for what each one deposited or withdrew. The invisible ledger keeps its own records whether you look at it or not. The mirror is right here. Where is your portfolio concentrated? If you lost the one category you are most invested in tomorrow, the job title, the skill, the role that defines you, what would remain? That is not a rhetorical question. Most people, when they actually sit with it, discover that the answer is smaller than they expected. Not because they lack value, because they have not deliberately spread the compounding. Here is where the framework becomes actionable rather than just diagnostic. Diversifying your identity portfolio does not mean becoming a generalist in your life. It means making small, deliberate deposits into underweight categories on a regular basis. The compounding effect this whole book is built on does not require dramatic inputs. It requires consistent ones. A 1% deposit in your resourcefulness identity this week. One time you solve a problem you have never solved before, without waiting for someone to hand you the answer, is not a dramatic moment. You will not feel transformed after it, but it enters the ledger. It earns interest tomorrow, and the week after. Across 10 years, that deposit compounded forward looks nothing like the small moment it came from. This is the moment the chapter has been quietly preparing since the opening minutes. State it plainly. A diversified identity portfolio does not just make you more capable in individual moments. It makes the whole structure resilient. When one category comes under pressure, and every category will, at some point, the others hold. You do not collapse into the single story. You have other stories to stand on while that one recovers. The compound interest chart that has run through this book as a financial metaphor. It is not just a metaphor anymore. That chart is your identity trajectory. The slope of that line over time is determined by where you are investing, how consistently, and whether your portfolio is concentrated in one fragile story or spread deliberately across the 5 categories that make a person fully operational. Now, the open loop. You held it while the framework built. The category where you are overexposed. You know it. Maybe it is competence, and everything else about your identity has been quietly starved. Maybe it is relational worth. And that single overinvestment explains a spending pattern or a relationship dynamic that has confused you for years. Maybe it is durability, and you have been calling it resilience while really using it as a substitute for the agency and resourcefulness you have not yet built. Whatever the category is, overexposure is not a character flaw. It is a portfolio imbalance. And portfolio imbalances are correctable. They are correctable in exactly the way this entire book has been describing. Small, deliberate, consistent. The rate of belief begins to shift the moment you make the first deposit. Before long, we will get to a point about the relationship between consistency and identity that clashes with the familiar story. When that idea snaps into focus, it shifts how you decide to spend the ordinary hours of an ordinary week. But for now, sit with this. Your identity is not a single story that either holds or breaks. It is a portfolio, and it is yours to build. Chapter 8. The daily deposit nobody thinks to make. Something is leaving you right now. Not loudly. Not in a single dramatic moment you could point to and say, there, that is where it went. It is leaving the way water leaves a glass left open on a windowsill, imperceptibly, continuously, and without asking your permission. Every day you move through the world without making one deliberate deposit into the person you are becoming, that version of you loses ground. Not because you failed. Not because you made the wrong choice at the wrong time. But because nobody told you that identity, like money, does not sit still. It compounds or it corrodes. There is no third option. And right now, somewhere in your day, corrosion is happening at a rate you cannot see, but you will absolutely feel it. In 2 years, in 5 years. In the quiet moments when you wonder why the distance between where you are and where you meant to be keeps widening instead of closing. This chapter will tell you exactly what to do about it. Tonight, if you choose. That word portfolio from the last chapter holds something most people never fully unpack. A portfolio is not a single asset. It is not one good decision you made in 2019 that you are still living off. It is a system of accumulating positions, each one small. Each one building on the last. Each one adding a fraction of weight to the whole, until the whole becomes something that could not have been predicted from any single piece. That is what your identity actually is. Not a fixed thing you discovered one afternoon and now carry around. A living accumulation of every small act, every repeated choice, every tiny moment in which you either confirm the person you are expanding into, or quietly stepped back from the edge of that person and returned to the familiar, smaller version. Both directions compound. That is the part nobody warns you about. Here is a question that will stay with you for the rest of this chapter. What did you do yesterday, specifically? One concrete thing that only the person you are becoming would do. Not the person you have been. Not the comfortable, established version of you that other people already know how to relate to. The forward version. The one with different financial habits, different instincts, different ways of reading a room or responding to a setback. Did that person show up yesterday even for 5 minutes? Hold that question. Let it breathe. Do not answer it yet. Remember the person you were in that chapter from 3 years ago before hindsight edits it. Not the place you hoped to be, the place you were really standing. The apartment, the bank account, the way you talked to yourself when things went wrong. Think about the story you were telling about money, about your own capabilities, about what was and was not available to people like you. Now think about how much of that story is still running in the background of today. Not as something you consciously believe anymore, as something you act from without noticing. That gap between what you consciously know and what you automatically do, that gap is maintained by a ledger you have never seen. The invisible ledger of self. Every day adds an entry to it whether you write one deliberately or not. That is the mechanism. That is the thing most people never name. A man named Vincent worked in a supply warehouse in his late 20s and read about investing during the lunch breaks between shifts. He opened a brokerage account with $47. His coworkers thought this was either impressive or pointless, depending on which one of them you asked. What Vincent understood, slowly at first, and then with great clarity, was not that $47 was going to make him wealthy. It was that $47 was making him into someone different. The act of depositing, of deciding that he was the kind of person who had a brokerage account and who knew what a dividend was, that act was doing something at the level of identity that the money itself could not do. He kept depositing. $20 some months, $50 when a shift ran long, not because the math was dramatic, because the man who made that deposit every month was not the same man who had started. 4 years in, he got a job offer from a financial services firm. A supervisor had passed his name along, not because of his portfolio size, but because of the way he talked about money. The way he talked about money had changed because the person talking had changed. And the person had changed one small deposit at a time. The $47 was never about the $47. Most financial advice stops at the mechanics. Open the account, diversify the holdings, keep the expense ratio low. Good advice, correct advice, but incomplete, because it treats the behavior as separate from the identity producing it. You can follow every correct step and still quietly believe at the level where beliefs actually live that you are not someone for whom this works, that the math applies to other people, that there is some hidden factor, some tax on people from your background or your income bracket or your specific flavor of starting point, that makes the compound curve bend for them and flatten for you. That belief is the villain, not your income, not your zip code, not even your past decisions. The belief that your identity is a fixed thing discovered, not built, that belief is what keeps the ledger in corrosion rather than compound. So here is what you are going to do. 5 minutes. That is the entire ask. 5 minutes per day done with intention, done consistently for 90 days produces something the research on habit formation and self-concept change agrees on across disciplines. It produces a structural shift, not a feeling, not a mood. A structural change in how you categorize yourself, how you interpret new information, how you respond to setbacks, how you calculate what is and is not possible for you. 90 days of daily deposits. The account looks different on day 91 than it did on day 1, not because of a single large event, because of 90 small ones. The deposit has 3 parts. Each one takes less than 2 minutes. Together they take 5. And that 5 minutes is not about feeling good. It is about closing a gap. First, you name one thing you did in the past 24 hours that the expanded version of you would do. Small is fine. It does not have to be heroic. You researched something before buying it. You had a conversation about money you would have avoided 2 years ago. You said no to something that would have cost you tomorrow to gain something today. You name it specifically, out loud or in writing, and you claim it as evidence. Not evidence of how great you are, evidence of who you are becoming. That is the deposit. That is the entry into the invisible ledger on the asset side. Second, you name one belief about money or your own capabilities that you held 3 years ago that you now know to be false or incomplete. 1. Stated plainly, not as a celebration of how far you have come, but as a calibration. You are training your brain to understand that its current beliefs are also subject to revision, that what you think today about your own capacity to earn, save, build, and accumulate is not the final word. It is the current word. Current words compound into new ones, or they corrode back into old ones. You choose the direction with this step. Third, you state one action you will take in the next 24 hours that only the forward version of you takes. 1. Specific enough that you could check it off tomorrow as done or not done. Not a vague intention, a particular act. Look up one term you do not understand yet. Move $20 to a separate account you have named for a goal. Read one page of something that challenges a financial assumption you currently hold. Specific, small, completable. That is the third deposit. 3 statements, 5 minutes. Done daily. This is not journaling in the casual sense. This is ledger management. This is the deliberate act of treating your self-concept the way a serious investor treats their portfolio, with regular contributions, with attention to what is growing and what is draining, with the understanding that every day without a deposit is not a neutral day. It is a day the corrosion ran unchecked. Now go back to the question from earlier. What did you do yesterday that only the person you are becoming would do? If the answer is nothing, that is not a judgment. It is data. It tells you that yesterday's entry in the invisible ledger went to the corrosion column by default, not by decision. That happens. The question is what today's entry says. You get to write it. You have always got to write it. You just were not told how specific and how small the writing could be. Down the line in this book, we will get to a point about the speed of identity change that clashes with the familiar story. Once that lands, it reshapes how you calculate what is actually possible within a single year of your life. The compound interest chart that appeared earlier in these pages, the one you might have read as a metaphor for your savings account, draw it again in your mind now. The x-axis is time. The y-axis is accumulated value. The curve is flat, almost boring for a long stretch, and then it bends. It bends because the accumulated deposits reach a threshold at which the growth begins feeding itself. That chart is not just about money. It is your identity trajectory map. The flat part is not failure. The flat part is loading. Every deposit you make during the flat part is the reason the curve eventually bends. Most people stop during the flat part because they cannot see the bend coming. Now you know it is coming. Now you know the flat part has a name and a function, and it is not evidence that the approach is wrong. The rate of belief changes slowly at first. Then it changes everything. 90 days of one intentional deposit per day does not feel like much while you are inside it. It feels exactly like the flat part of the curve. But the ledger is recording every entry. And ledgers do not lie. The only question that remains now, the only question that matters tonight, is which column you want today's entry to land in. Chapter 9. You have always been compounding something. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same unresolved question. In every era, in every language, etched into stone or pressed into paper or spoken quietly across a fire, human beings have wrestled with a single persistent mystery. Why does one life expand while another, starting from roughly the same place, contracts? The question was not answered by bloodline. It was not answered by luck, not entirely. What the keepers of every great tradition seemed to understand, in their own vocabulary, was that a human being is not a fixed thing. A human being is a direction. And now that question has narrowed from civilizations and centuries down to one specific person, sitting exactly where you are right now. The answer is closer than it has ever been. There is an unanswered question under everything that follows until the section closes it. You have been compounding something your entire life. The question is not whether the process has been running. It has. The question is what it has been running on, and whether the rate you have been operating at was chosen or inherited. Hold that question. It will resolve before this chapter ends. The ledger has been recording every entry. That was where the last chapter left you, standing in front of the invisible account of your identity, watching deposits accumulate in real time. 90 days of one intentional deposit per day, and the curve was just beginning to lift. You could feel the logic of it. But now comes the part most people never reach. Most people are so focused on building something new that they never stop to look at what was already being built. Look back at your ordinary days in that chapter from 3 years ago, before hindsight edits it. Not the circumstances, the job, the apartment, the bank balance. Forget those. Go deeper. What did you believe about what was possible for you? What story were you carrying about the kind of person you were, about what you deserved, about how far someone like you could realistically go? That version of you was not standing still. That version of you was compounding. The beliefs compounded. The self-concept compounded. The small decisions that confirmed the story compounded. You were not frozen in place 3 years ago. You were moving, and the direction was determined by the rate you were running at. Here is where people make the critical error. They look back at difficult years, years of stagnation, of repeated mistakes, of income that didn't grow and relationships that didn't deepen, and they call those years lost. They treat that time as a void, as wasted, as a sentence that must be served through some kind of compensatory effort later. But that is not what the ledger shows. Difficult years are still deposits. Marcus grew up in a household where money was discussed in whispers and panic. Every bill was a crisis. Every unexpected expense was treated like a personal moral failure. By the time he was 26, he had a stable income and no idea why he couldn't hold on to it. He'd been telling himself for years that he was just bad with money. The story felt true because it had evidence. He could point to the overdrafts, the missed payments, the impulsive buys he regretted by Tuesday. And so he compounded that story. Every time he made a financial mistake, it confirmed the belief. Every time he avoided looking at his account, the avoidance became part of the ledger. The identity of someone who could not be trusted with money grew compound interest on itself for almost a decade. Then one afternoon he sat down and did something unusual. He wrote out every single financial behavior he could remember from childhood, not to assign blame, just to trace the line. He saw that what he thought was a personal failing was actually a compounded inheritance, a set of beliefs about money and safety that had been depositing into his identity since before he was old enough to understand what money was. Seeing the line did not erase the line, but it bent it. That is the revelation this chapter is built on. The past did not create a fixed you. It created a compounding trajectory, and trajectories can be bent. Go back to the compound interest chart. You have seen it before in this book as a financial metaphor, a flat line that holds steady and unremarkable for years before it starts to curve. And then the curve becomes something that looks almost violent in its acceleration. You have been thinking of that chart as a picture of what you want to build. Now redraw it. Put your life on the vertical axis. Put time on the horizontal axis. Mark the moment you are in right now as the point where the rate changes. This is not a metaphor. This is arithmetic. If your rate of belief, the compounding rate of your identity, has been running at something low, something cautious, something inherited rather than chosen, then everything before this moment was the flat part of the curve. And the flat part feels like nothing. It feels like treading water. It feels from the inside exactly like being stuck. But the curve was still building. You were still accumulating evidence, still developing pattern recognition, still failing in specific ways that are now visible to you in retrospect, which means they are useful to you in ways they could not have been when you were inside them. Every hard year was a deposit of information. Every failed attempt was a deposit of precision. Even the seasons when you compounded the wrong story, those years clarify the cost. And knowing the cost of a low rate is one of the most motivating pieces of information a person can carry. What is the rate of belief you are operating at right now? Not the rate you want to reach. Not the rate you are performing in public. The actual rate, the one the invisible ledger reflects. This is the mirror moment. You do not need to answer out loud, but you need to answer honestly, because the rate you are operating at today is the rate that determines where the curve goes from here. A small, honest upgrade to that rate, held steady, compounding daily, produces something that looks like luck from the outside and feels like inevitability from the inside. Now close the loop. You have been compounding something your entire life. The process was never optional. The only variable was the rate, and for most of that time, the rate was set by forces you did not choose, by what you watched, by what you were told, by the financial panic in hushed voices at a kitchen table, by the first time someone told you what people like you should realistically expect. Those forces set an initial rate. But the initial rate is not the permanent rate. That is the difference between a fixed thing and a trajectory. And you are not a fixed thing. The chart that shows your identity from this day forward is not written yet. But the rate you carry into tomorrow is being chosen right now, in this moment, by whether you believe the curve can lift. The flat part of any compound curve always looks like proof that nothing is happening. That is the geometry of the thing. That is how it has to look before the acceleration arrives. You are not behind. You are at the inflection point. The rate of belief you carry determines everything that follows. Compound or corrode. The ledger records both equally and without judgment. The question the final chapter will answer is the only one that remains. Not what you want to become, but who you already are in the ledger that has been running all along. Chapter 10. The person at the end of the chart is you. You have made it to this page. Think about what that means, not as a compliment but as data. Most people who start a book like this one do not finish it. They get the first rush of recognition. They feel the idea move through them. Then the gravity of the ordinary pulls them back. You did not let that happen. Something in you has already changed. Not because of this book. Because of a decision you keep making, quietly, without applause, every time you choose to stay in the conversation instead of walking away. Here is what that choice costs you if you are honest about it. Staying awake to possibility is not comfortable. It would have been easier to put this down. It would have been easier to say you already knew this, or that it does not apply to your specific situation, or that you will get to it later when things calm down. The fact that you are still here means you have been carrying something. A hope, maybe. Or a question you cannot quite name. This chapter will not let you carry it much longer. The ledger has been running all along. That is where the last chapter left you, with the idea that the question was never about who you want to become, but about who you already are in a record that has been accumulating without your permission. Every belief you rehearsed, every story you repeated to yourself in the dark. Every time you said yes when you meant yes, and every time you said yes when you meant something else entirely. All of it has been entering the ledger. All of it has been compounding. Here is the tension that deserves to sit with you before the relief arrives. If your identity has been compounding without your deliberate direction, then you have been building something. The question is whether you will like what it produces at scale. A small negative rate applied consistently over years does not stay small. You know this about money. A debt that seems manageable at 23 looks very different at 31. The same arithmetic applies to the story you tell about what you deserve, what is possible for someone like you, and how much of the world you are allowed to take up. That is the cost nobody calculates, not because they are foolish, but because the ledger is invisible. You do not get a statement in the mail. You do not get a quarterly report showing you that your self-concept has corroded this year due to repeated low-grade dismissals of your own ideas. The cost shows up differently. It shows up in the hesitation before you speak in a room where your voice matters. It shows up in the month you do not send the email, the year you do not make the ask, the decade you wait for permission that was never coming from anywhere outside of you. Stop for a second. Move back to that earlier point before memory softens it, not in abstract terms but concretely. The apartment or the house or the room. The job or the absence of one. The conversations you were having with yourself at midnight. Think about what you believe then about your own ceiling. Think about whether the ceiling has moved, and if it has, think about what moved it. It was not a single day. It was not one decision or one piece of information. It was a rate, a quiet, accumulating rate of belief that compounded in a direction, however slowly. That rate is the only thing this book has ever been about. And here is where the revelation lands, not as a surprise, but as a confirmation of what you have suspected since the early chapters. You are not trying to become someone new. There is no new person waiting on the other side of enough effort. What you are doing, every time you chose the harder interpretation of yourself over the easier one, is building toward the person your compound rate was always going to produce. The chart was drawn the moment you changed the rate. The destination was set. You are not chasing an identity. You are arriving at one. Let that settle, because it changes the texture of the work. When you believe you are becoming someone new, the work feels like construction from nothing. It feels fragile. It feels like something that could collapse if you miss a week or slip back into an old pattern for a month. But when you understand that you are compounding toward a version of yourself the math has already projected, the work feels different. A missed day is not a collapse. It is a rounding error. The trajectory holds because trajectories are functions of rate, not of perfect execution. There is a man named Caleb. He was 26, working a logistics job that paid enough to keep him from panicking and not enough to keep him from calculating. He started one practice, not a goal, not a 5-year plan. He started spending 20 minutes every morning reading about the field he wanted to enter, supply chain technology, specifically algorithmic routing. He did not tell anyone. He did not announce a career change. He just changed his rate of belief about what his mind could hold. At month 4, he understood concepts his colleagues did not know existed. At month 11, he solved a routing problem at work that saved his company 4 hours per week and mentioned, casually, that he had been studying the space. At month 18, someone in a different company heard about that conversation and called him. He was not a new person at month 18. He was the person that 20 minutes a day had been building all along. You are Caleb, or you will be if you choose the rate. Here is what the person at year 5 of positive compounding looks like in concrete terms, because abstract promises are easy to dismiss. Their vocabulary is different, not fancier but more precise. They use language that signals they have done the thinking, and other people feel it before they can explain why. Their posture in a room is not arrogance. It is the settled quality of someone who knows what they know and does not need to perform certainty. Their decisions are faster, not because they are careless, but because the hours of compounded self-trust have eliminated the internal negotiations that used to take days. Their income is higher, but that is almost a side effect. The direct result of the fact that they are now visible to opportunities that used to pass over them, not because of gatekeeping, but because they were not yet legible to those opportunities in the language those opportunities spoke. Their relationship with discomfort has changed. Not that it is gone. Discomfort does not go away for the people who keep growing. It just stops being a stop sign and becomes information. They feel it, they read it, they use it. That is the compound return on thousands of small moments where they chose to interpret discomfort as data instead of danger. And here is the line that closes every loop this book ever opened. The compound interest chart that financial advisors draw, the one where the line looks flat for years and then bends upward almost violently, that chart is not just a metaphor for your money. It is the map of your identity. You have been on that chart the whole time. The line looked flat for a while because that is what compound curves do before they reveal themselves. The bend is coming. For some of you, the bend is already here. For others, you are a few deliberate quarters away. But the person at the end of the chart is not a stranger. The person at the end of the chart made the same small choices you are making right now. They kept the same ledger you are keeping. They compounded the same belief you are compounding. The distance between you and that person is not talent. It is not luck. It is not the right circumstances arriving at the right time. The distance is rate, applied over time, consistently enough that the math takes over and carries the rest. You have crossed something today. Not a finish line. There is no finish line on a curve that keeps climbing, but a threshold. The kind you only recognize when you look back later and remember the exact moment you decided the ledger would run in your favor from here. So the question is not whether you will compound. The question is what you will compound next.